Sweet Jesus, man, it's just so good that you're here with us. It's good the way that we get to come and spend time with you and be with you. It's just so special that you're coming to share your body and your blood with us tonight on such a big night for that, because all this time we've been talking about what's it like to give somebody else other than you a seat at your table. And the table really does belong to you. It's important, I think, that we get that part straight for ourselves. And I know every week we just say at the end, man, whatever you're going to do, don't give up a seat like that to anybody other than Jesus. And that's the good news. That's just the good news. That's the good news tonight. In your sweet name we pray. Amen. So this table, I'm going to see if this works, but this table, we've been talking about it for several weeks now, and we've kind of had a meal, a kind of a communion-like meal the first week, if you remember, and we put a whole smorgasbord up here. That's a great image, I think, for what the Lord's Supper is all about, because it's always more than, it's always a great Thanksgiving. There's so much that goes on with that celebration that Jesus brings us to. I think the most important piece of that is that if you are, and maybe you're not tonight, but if you are willing to give Jesus that seat at your table, I think you're going to begin to see incredible things happen. And when you let Jesus sit down there, one of the things that's going to happen is, can you hear that? You're going to be so close to him, you're going to be able to like clink a glass like that. And I think that matters. I think it matters because, number one, it tells you that Jesus will never quit on you for any reason whatsoever. It tells you, number two, you belong to him. It tells you, number three, you're at the right table. You don't have the wrong reservation. You're at the right table. It tells you, number four, I think this is the most important piece. It doesn't matter where you've been so far in your life. It doesn't matter what's happened to you in the last week. It doesn't matter what you've been through or how discouraged you are about yourself or what has happened around you. What does matter, though, is that seat right there, it belongs to Jesus. And it belongs to Jesus because he chooses to sit with us. He chooses to be with us despite how lost we might be, despite whether sometimes we can even recognize him at all, despite whether we feel like he's 1,000 miles away, he's right in that seat. And like we've said every week, whatever you do, unless his name is Jesus, don't give up that seat at that table for anybody else. Amen? Don't give it up. Because the closer he is to you, the closer the opportunity is for you to be able to clink those glasses. And then everything changes in your life, or it definitely can, and it goes from like so much emptiness, just that one little thing. It goes from so much emptiness to some incredible fullness. Tonight we're going to get to celebrate the Lord's Supper. We'll do that here in a little bit, but man, that is the best possible way, I think, for this set of messages to end. It ends with the way that Jesus, in the very best way, demonstrates his willingness to love us and be with us and lay down his life for us. That's exactly what happened the very first time Jesus shared this meal. And I mean, you got to know that the people that were there for the first time, they had to have been blown away. Had to have been stunned. They couldn't have imagined that. They thought they were going to get like a traditional Passover meal, I think, but it ended up being like nothing like that whatsoever. Because instead of it being a tradition, or instead of it being sort of a history event, it was Jesus saying, look, this is me. This bread, this is me. This wine, this is me. This love for you right here, this is me. All of this is me, and I want to come to you. And that's why, despite the way it's going to feel right now, maybe, or wherever you are, that's why, no matter what, you just don't give that seat away, right? You don't give it away to anybody else other than Jesus. And if you got nothing else out of this series, I hope you got that. So we're going to do some work on that tonight. It takes me to some questions. I think I've got probably 5. Why do you think it's true that God says that he puts this table that we've been talking about smack dab in the middle of our struggles, or smack dab in the middle of our enemies? Why would God do that? So 5 points that come out of it. The first one is God would do that so that tonight, maybe for the first time, tonight we would know that God is enough. That's why God would do that. The second reason that God would do that, which I think is like really interesting, is God would do that so that our enemies, however we perceive of them, so that our enemies would know that God is enough. The third reason would be so that we can figure out what it's like to see our cup overflow. Overflow with the fullness of God, the love of Jesus, overflow with the blessings of God, the life of God, the freedom of God, all of that. So that we could see our cup overflow. Number 4, so that we would know that God is always more than willing and more than capable of staying in the fray. Like the fray represents all those enemies we've been talking about. And so in the fray, what do the enemies see? They see what's going on at that table, and they see Jesus sitting there and not moving, and they see you sitting there and not moving, and they see you beginning to see Jesus move on your life. 4th reason. 5th reason is for Jesus to be able to prove that there is tonight no other safer place to be. So God is going to meet us exactly where we are. Like, that's important. I know, like, my grandmother would, she was Lutheran to a fault, so she was German Lutheran. So, like, when she started going to, and I remember this, when she started going to communion, they had it like once a month at that church. So she would go to the church on Saturday before communion, and she would talk to the pastor about what all was going on in her life. And then the pastor would kind of give her the sign to kind of go, do you feel like you're ready for the Lord's Supper the next day? My grandfather was a Mason, so the Masons and the Lutheran Church, or the brand that I was in at the time, they just didn't get along. Like, they didn't see eye to eye on anything, basically. So my grandfather wouldn't go with her, and that was the reason why. And so I bet I did not see my grandfather take communion for probably a good part of my life, like probably till I was 16, 17 years old. And he didn't say much about it, but I always knew there was some reason of why that was. And so that was kind of the deal. Like, what would have happened if my grandfather would not have gotten the message of sort of, you're not worthy, you're not deserving? Like, what would have happened if he would have gotten a different message? The different message would have been that, you know what? God is always meeting you exactly where you are. Always, every time, every day. I think the question really isn't, is God willing to be with us? But I think the harder question, which we've been working on this whole series, the harder question really is, are we really willing to meet God? To answer that question, you got to get to another question. And that question is, if I'm really willing to meet God, where have I been, or where am I right now, the very most vulnerable in my life? And if vulnerability is a piece of honesty in this program, and it is, any recovery work, rigorous honesty is going to show up right there all the time. And if rigorous honesty is a part of what it means to be sober, you ask that question, where am I the most vulnerable? And to answer that question, I think you get to a better question, which is, where is the gift of availability, both on my part and on the part of Jesus? Jesus is saying, I'm sitting right here. I'm fully available to you all day long, all the time. Every time we celebrate this meal, I'm available to you. Every worship service, everywhere you are, I'm available to you. It's like the clinking of the glasses. The closer you get to Jesus, and the more willing you are to trust him with stuff that goes on with you, the more you're going to begin to hear that clinking of the glass. That Louis Giglio talks about that experience as being, which I think is interesting, he talks about it as being an activity of lingering. Lingering, like, that word isn't used a whole lot, but what do you think it means, like, to linger? Well, it doesn't really mean to loiter. Thought about that, it doesn't really mean that. It doesn't mean to, like, hang out because you have nothing else to do. It kind of means that maybe you're at a gathering. This would be a good image, I think, is like maybe you're at a gathering or somebody's done some teaching or whatever, and you're hanging around, you're lingering in that room because you would really like to find a way to talk to that person that's speaking that night. You'd like to ask them a question maybe, or share something that happened to you or whatever. That's lingering. The practice of lingering, or practical activities of lingering, there are several of those, but that's like trusting. It has to do with like being available. It has to do with being willing to learn. It has to do with a bunch of stuff like that. But I think there are three big pieces in our lives where we're going to really have a harder time getting to that place of lingering. The first one is when I decide that my most important job or whatever is to maybe figure out how I stack up in comparison to other Christians and the way they do it. Like, this person prays better than I do. This person gives more than I do. This person pays attention to other people more. This person is not lost in themselves as much as me. This person doesn't seem to struggle with their emotions as much as me. This person doesn't seem to struggle with negativity as much as me. There's a million reasons that could be true. But the comparison conversation goes on not with the party of one, but with the party of two. And the comparison conversation is always going on with the enemy. He's an ace at being able to go, well, what about you? Like, how do you stack up with your friend over there? Like, why can't you be more like him? Like, you must be missing something. Are you sure that you're really checking out with God? Are you sure it's really okay? That comparison thing is tough stuff, because in almost every case, when we get to a place like that, we are like literally taking steps away from God. The second piece of lingering that I think is really helpful is, how do I identify how much power I need in my life to feel safe? Maybe I don't feel safe with this situation right here. Maybe I don't feel safe sitting down with Jesus and clinking a glass. Maybe I'm not sure I want Jesus to be that close. What kind of power do I need in my life to feel safe? And the third tough place where we're going to struggle with lingering is, like however it spins out for you is like unbelief. When you hear the steps, do you believe that God could really bring you to a place of sobriety and peace? Do you really think that's possible? Or have you convinced yourself that it might be true for everybody else in this room? It might work that way for everybody else here, but you know what? It'll never work for you. There's too much water under the bridge. Too many things have happened to you. Too much stuff has gone on that's not right, and you just can't imagine that that's true. Well, that's when you really have had somebody steal your opportunity for that loving lingering. And it's definitely the enemy doing that. The enemy doing all those things right there, comparing, talking about power, talking about if you have enough strength, if you're not a weakling, you should be able to do A, B, C, or D. That's all him. That isn't God. Lingering in God's presence, honestly, staying with God, despite situations where, man, it just doesn't feel like I should be with God. Right? I don't even feel like, I'm not even sure I feel like I trust God at all. Maybe I don't. So what you do is you stand around the back of the room maybe until you can get like a little bit of a beat on God, and then you become more and more willing to get up there and ask Jesus a straight up question. And I know if you would do that in a prayer life or however you do it, however that works for you, I do know that you're going to get an answer. You're going to get Jesus talking to you about how he can love you. First thing I think he would say to you is, you know what, let's just come over here and sit down. I think it's always important when you say to somebody, hey, do you have a second? Let's sit down. Jesus does it all the time. Like, I will never forget the piece of the Bible where there's like several thousand people in a field somewhere, kind of near the ocean, I think, and the disciples right about then, the guys that are following Jesus, they're thinking, man, this crowd's getting too big for us. And they're like, what are we going to do with these people? Like, they start asking Jesus, what do you want us to do with them? And Jesus goes, well, have the people sit down. Have them sit down. Because Jesus knows he can be the host in every way to every one of those people that are sitting down on that day. Disciples don't believe it. They don't think he's enough. They think lingering on that particular occasion is a terrible idea. They think it's not going to go well for Jesus. They can't imagine that. And what happens? What happens? What happens is everyone gets fed. What happens is there's more than enough. What happens is there's no emptiness in the place. What happens is a miracle breaks out, and the miracle is a miracle of love and a miracle of Jesus saying, yeah, you know, like, I really am enough. You might not believe it today. You might not believe it tomorrow. You might not believe it next week. But someday, you're going to believe that I'm enough. Step 2 says it this way. I came to believe. Just imagine myself sitting at that seaside dealie there with 5,000 some people. Imagine the anxiety that the disciples felt when they were like, look, we got whatever it was, 2 loaves of bread and, I don't know, 4 or 5 fish. What are we supposed to do with that? I love Jesus' response. Well, I mean, have the people sit down. We're going to have a meal together. We're going to have a fellowship together. We're going to spend some time together, and people are going to get fed. That's what I think step 2 takes you to. Is like, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, 2 fish here, some bread here, greater than ourselves, trying to feed 5,000 people, greater than ourselves, which I could not do, could restore us to sanity. Is there a greater power in your life tonight? And if there is, are you willing to linger with that greater power? What greater power are you currently lingering with? Maybe the greater power that you're lingering with tonight is fear. Maybe the greater power that you're lingering with tonight is embarrassment. Maybe it's defeat. It could be a million things. Which one of those are you currently lingering with? Because where you're lingering is really where your attention is going to be. So like, when Jesus becomes what you're going to be, who you're going to be lingering with, that's where I think the growth is really going to begin. So the hardest part about us is we actually succumb to our enemies the more isolated we become. So the quieter it gets, the more alone we feel. That means the more afraid we get, and that means that we are in the middle of that process of succumbing to the enemy who is now sitting at our table. We succumb to our enemies in isolation. We say to ourselves, it's kind of like post-treatment in a lot of ways thinking. We say, man, I have it all under control. We use what I would call short-term memory. Like we go, short-term memory loss, we go like, we forget what God has ever done for us. We forget the history of a loving God in Jesus Christ. We forget the way God has offered up Jesus for us. We forget that. Short-term memory loss. God has this great name for Jesus, and he calls Jesus Emmanuel. That means that God sits in the middle of us, sits at our table, spends lots of time with us, and God sits also in the middle of our stuff. Doesn't matter what our stuff is, he's sitting there. I think God is sitting at your table right now tonight. I do think that. I know that. And so the being in the middle of us is being honest with us and allowing us to maybe for once be honest with him. Because if we could be honest with him, we are exactly where Jesus wants us to be. God always delivers abundance when we believe that the best we can deliver is scarcity. So I'm going to give this little assignment. My assignment is like, what do you think it would be like if I ask you to be radiant for God, be radiant in God? How do we become radiant? Well, we become radiant, I think, when we're sitting there and we're at that table and we clink our glass and we get that close to Jesus, and it's not our radiance that's showing, it's his radiance that's showing. And we see Jesus take on this entirely new light. And that happens when we're locked on him. I think sometimes we want to go, man, I don't have a right to be locked on him. I don't deserve to be locked on him. I'm never going to be healthy enough to be locked on him. See, that none of those statements are true. They're only true based on the way the enemy is trying to sit at our table. Be radiant in God. Radiant when we get locked into God. And so I want to read you a psalm to kind of finish tonight, Psalm 34. This is what it says. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will give glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and what did he do? He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. My favorite verse. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people. For those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Sweet Jesus, that's what it's like when you speak to us. That's what it's like when you come and clink your glass with us. That's what it's like when you sit down and take the right seat at our table. Thank you for doing that. And tonight, you're going to show us even more of what it's like when you take a seat at our table. And so we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper tonight. And we're also going to give out white chips tonight as a part of that celebration. So if you'd like to get a white chip tonight, you can come to my station up here. But the thing about white chips are this, like, my question is, do you think for one night, you'd be willing to give up your presuppositions about what's going on with God, what's going on with you, what's wrong with you, what's right with you all? You think you'd be able to give all that up and take a white chip to basically say, you know what, Jesus? For one night, I'm willing to give up my control of my life to see what you're going to do with me. One night. Would you be willing to pick up one of those chips for one night? If you would, come to my station. I'll give you one of those chips tonight. Would love to be able to do that. And I think it'd be an exciting night for us, for both of us. So the night that Jesus was betrayed, rejected by lots of people, and eventually the world, he took bread like this and he broke it. And he gave it to his friends and his disciples, and he said, take and eat. This is my body given for you. When you eat from this bread, you will never be hungry again. That same night, Jesus took a cup, kind of like this one, and he said, take and drink. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people, for the forgiveness of sins and for life. And when you drink from this cup, you will never be thirsty again. Let's come and celebrate this meal. In Jesus' sweet name, amen.